one of the problems is you get one chance with a kid. And once they've taken their SAT and once they've applied to college, that chance is over, right? And if you do them the disservice of being dishonest to them, which I think occasionally happens, that's someone's life that you've now messed up.
Hello, and welcome to the Admittedly podcast. My name is Thomas Caleel. I'm the former director of MBA admissions and financial aid for my alma mater, the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. In this podcast, I don't promise easy answers or quick fixes, but I will use my decades of experience to help you achieve your education goals. Now let's get started.
Today I'm joined by Matthew Demmer, Associate Director of the New York offices and Director of Advantage Testing UK. Matt holds a BA in English Literature and Philosophy from Georgetown, where he graduated magna cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa. Matt brings a global perspective on standardized testing and tutoring. He's worked extensively with international students navigating both the US and UK systems, and he has a deep understanding of cultural and academic transitions. Throughout his career, Matt has run programs in Dubai, Amman, and Abu Dhabi. Matt, we're so glad to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What I love about this conversation with you is that you've been doing this now for 22 years.
Yeah.
And so you're OG here at Advantage Testing, and you just bring such a wealth of experience. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about your philosophy and then really get into international students and international studying for U.S. students, because it's something we're seeing a lot of. I know we talked before and you're seeing a lot of it. But I'd really like to just start with basics, like who or what sparked your love of learning?
I had an English teacher in high school, Dr. Bresnik, who was really the first teacher who challenged us he taught a course called Aesthetics. We read everything from Aristotle to Dostoevsky. It was an incredibly diverse course of reading. And he taught us to think and to write, and he was really hard. But was brilliant and really entertaining and just a wonderful guy. And then at university, I studied philosophy for a year in London, which is a gateway to what I do now. And it was a tutorial system, and it was an incredible learning experience. The pedagogy and a one-on-one tutorial with English Don, philosophy Don at a British university is an experience that I will never forget. It was amazing.
What is, just for some of our listeners, what is a tutorial system? Because it's very unique.
Very unique. So a tutorial system in my case was at a lot of UK universities, your main coursework is meeting with a professor in your field of study, one-on-one or two-on-one, and taking the course. So it's not a class. It's less interactive in some ways, but it's much more high pressure in other ways. So you would show up and he'd say, what did you think of this argument, this philosophical argument? And it's you and the guy who's been doing this for 50 years and is, the top of his field, and you're trying to develop a cogent argument on the spot to a question that you did not know you were going to be asked. And you can't hide. It is just you. So it's great.
I love that. And so how has that informed the way you approach tutoring and work with your students?
Well, I was always interested in teaching. I considered getting a PhD in English philosophy and going into the university system. But that experience really unlocked for me the power of one-on-one tutoring and what one-on-one teaching could do, and at its best, how much it could drive an individual to achieve academically. So when I graduated from college, I learned about Advantage Testing and their methodology very much matched my experience, it was a no-brainer. So I applied and was fortunate to get a job.
And when you talk about the philosophy, that's academic engagement and joy in learning.
Right.
And how do you balance that? Because so many students are feeling stressed and fearful about the academic rigor and their workload. So how do you keep the joy and curiosity in that?
I think it takes a very weird combination of being on the level of a student of that age. I think that you need to have the adaptability to be on the level of a 12-year-old, which I think is over time is actually, so long as you keep that muscle honed, you can do,
right.
But also be on the level of a 16-year-old. I will speak not consciously, but my body language, my speech to a 16-year-old student at an all-girls school is very different than a 16-year-old student at a boys' school or a co-ed school.
Right.
You're talking about slightly different things, but so long as you can be authentic and jive with them on their level, they know they're talking to a real person that cares about them and empathizes with them. And that's where it all begins. And if they believe that you're on their side, they will work hard because they want to work hard. I mean, everybody wants to achieve. They're here because they want to achieve. So it's really just unlocking that and the inner confidence that they can achieve if they work really hard. And that seems obvious, but these tests are hard. You start out at, 1100 and you know what you're trying to get to. And that path seems really hard. But if you have someone that you trust constantly telling you, look, you can totally do this. Look what you did last week. Look what you did the week before. Keep going. You can totally do this. It makes a difference.
Well, and I think it's interesting. You bring up a very good and unique point, and because I get a lot of grief in comments and that how I am personally responsible for pushing these students past their breaking point and creating anxiety. But you mentioned kind of more supporting and clearing the road ahead, and it's more of a pull than it is a push. And I've found that with my students over the years, they are driven. They want to succeed, and like any high performance athlete or anyone, they need coaching. What is that kind of your approach, or what?
I think definitely. I mean, I think students don't do well if they feel tremendous pressure. They certainly don't do well on a standardized test, which is timed, and they're sitting in a room with a bunch of other kids. So, I mean, a big component of it, is depressurizing the situation. And the way to depressurize any situation is to make someone feel the confidence that they truly mastered this material. If they feel like they've got it, they're not going to be stressed. They've done it before. This is just another test. And so it really, I mean, I don't think I've ever told a student like, oh, you did so great, now you should take another test. Like, no, it's the feedback. It's the back and forth.
And what do you think is the main evolution over the past 22 years? Because you've seen a lot of change, I'm sure. Any major trends that you've identified?
I think more institutional knowledge among families, which can be a positive and negative, because sometimes I think it's half knowledge and there's another half that needs to be brought in. But there's so much conversation around these issues, around these topics, that 20 years ago, it was not rare for people to be like, I have no idea about the college process. I have no idea about which do what you do and we're fine. Right. And now you get a lot of preconceived notions of exactly what needs to happen and how it needs to go. So you have to dismantle, to disabuse every once in a while and to educate. But that's a process of educating as well.
No, certainly. I see that in the admissions consulting world too, where sometimes very well-meaning parents have almost antiquated ideas of how it happened. And I applied to college many years ago and things were completely different. And so a lot of it, yes, is education and partnership, and also protecting space, holding space for that student to be themselves and really find their voice in the process.
That's a lovely way of saying it. The space is a great way. Yeah.
And so how, as a parent, as a father yourself, how do you implement that at home, right? Because it's all well and good for us to be expert in our field,
right? But
I have a junior and an eighth grader. Eighth grader just went through the high school application process, and it's balancing that role of parent and expert.
I think the role at home is to get people that are better than me doing it for me, supporting them, and then I can parent.
Exactly.
I think it's really hard to wear both hats. Anytime I've tried to teach, I think either of my children anything, I think it's been an abject failure. So there are teachers that are much better than me, and they can handle it just fine.
Absolutely. My approach as well. Wanted to make sure I was doing it right and ask an expert here. I want to take a little bit of a shift because part of your title and a large part of your work, especially in your early career, is internationally focused. And we're seeing a lot of international students wanting to blend U.S. schools and non-U.S. schools into their portfolio, and also U.S. students starting to think more broadly about education opportunities in the world at large. So can we talk about that? Maybe trends that you've seen and share some of your expertise would be great.
In terms of trends, definitely the Europe to the U.S. trend it's always an ebb and a flow. Some years there's many more students, some years there's fewer. There's geopolitical reasons for that. There's lots of different reasons for that. U.S. to Europe, I'm actually always frustrated by the fact that U.S. students don't apply to schools in Europe more. I mean, I think there are some students that I see and I think would do great at a European university and would really thrive there. But it's not, they're much more likely to go to California than London. It's the same time difference. It's five hours either way.
Right.
If you're coming from New York,
London, yeah, exactly. The UK doesn't even
it's crazy.
register, or Toronto,
Right.
which is even closer.
Even closer.
I had to put that in. I have a Canadian wife, and she would never forgive me if I did not talk about the wonderful education. But Australia and Asia and just this global universe of very interesting, different education opportunities.
Yeah, and a much easier application process generally than the U.S.
Yes.
So there's practical reasons for it as well.
When you say easier, what do you mean?
So I mean, it definitely depends on the school, but for UCAS schools, which are every school in England besides Oxbridge, the application process is much more streamlined than the U.S. application process. It's just your statement of purpose, which gets sent to all the schools, your course selection, and that's about it. So it's clicking 5 boxes for the 5 schools you can apply to through the UCAS portal. I mean, yes, there's a little more to it than that, but compare that to personal statement, supplementary essays, interviews,
recommendations, extracurricular activities. Yeah,
just a different Eximbo X.
Okay. And then, so when we look from the other perspective, international students, what's something that they sometimes misunderstand about applying to U.S. universities?
I think if you're an international student, and I actually think this applies to a lot of U.S. students as well, it is hard to understand the sheer breadth of excellence at U.S. institutions, right? I don't think, I always try to remind people that you can go to a school that has 5,000 students or 40,000 students that is in a rural town in New Hampshire or in the middle of downtown New York City. I mean, that opportunity is insane to people. And I don't think they really appreciate how different those schools are culturally, academically, institutionally. Their focus is different. And if they just spend the time to research it, to understand what all these schools have in common and have differently, they can find a place that truly speaks to them. And it's probably not a place they've ever heard of, may not be a place they've ever heard of.
Exactly.
And that's a big part of it for me.
And I find the flexibility is surprising sometimes because, the UK system is a little bit more prescribed and narrow, where you can come to the US colleges and really explore and dive into the liberal arts and pursue a lot of different interests.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the trends that I've seen that I don't love is students going to college in the U.S. with a very defined idea of what they're going to study when they arrive.
Yes.
And I'm a product liberal arts system. I mean, I was reasonably confident that I wanted to study literature, but I discovered philosophy and a lot of different topics at college that I didn't think of before. I took a bunch of physics courses. I was never a good physics student in high school. So, I think that's a missed philosophical opportunity. I always tell you could spend your life doing this. Why not do the thing that you're not going to spend the rest of your life doing? But
couldn't agree more. I think we're a little bit archaic in that regard, but old school. But I hope that it is nice to see still a lot of the major universities maintaining the rigor and the structure of the liberal arts curriculum and the required classes and making students stretch their brains a little bit. I think is a very good thing. Great. When we talk about international students as well, right? It's not just about school selection, it's about test prep. And for students who aren't growing up in a standardized testing culture or in a different just learning environment and culture, how do you guide them? What are some of the things you talk to them about?
So I think in the US, in New York, most students have an understanding that this is a hard test and it's going to take a lot of work.
Right.
And I think it's a sneaky hard test. I think for a lot of students, they take a diagnostic they might not do well, but it didn't seem that hard. They're sort of confused why they didn't do well. And there's two conclusions to draw from that. One is the right conclusion, that it's just sneaky hard. And one is the wrong conclusion, which is like, it's not that hard. I'm sure I could get it pretty fast. So for a lot of families and a lot of students, it's just educating them based on statistics, saying, look, the majority of our students take 8 to 12 months to 6 to 18 months, depending on location, depending on where you are, to study for this test. You're probably not different. So you're probably not going to take 3 months to study this test and do as well as you would like to do. It's probably going to take a while. It's probably going to take a lot of work and effort. So let's recognize that from the start, and then you're going to be great, So I think that education is a really important one at the beginning. Not to say, I think a lot of times people in our industry like to feed into the desires of people rather than try to educate them on what's actually, is correct. And so, sure, we can do this in 3 months. Let's go. That's not the way we approach things.
No. And believe me, I have miles of comments in my social media to prove the fact that, yes, sometimes the hard advice is not well received. But there is no easy path here. And speaking of not easy paths, I talk a lot about Ivy Plus schools, but the other, big shining beacon out there is Oxbridge, and you have deep experience in that. There's been some changes in Oxbridge, I think, recently. Could you talk about those, please?
Oxbridge admissions is, that's why I separated it out from the previous admissions and the UCAS admissions. It is a much more challenging admissions process than standard UCAS process. It involves not just a statement of purpose, but if you get past that round into the interview round, you do have a very hard interview with usually an Oxford Don or a Cambridge Don and a couple of other people. And the questions that they ask are very difficult to prepare for. They're really trying to test your critical thinking, really trying to test your ability to reason within your subject, but not in a way that you could possibly prepare for. And your ability to do that extemporaneously is a large part of your admissions process. That's a hard thing to do
indeed.
For anybody. And especially, I think more and more, we don't teach rhetoric anymore. Like we've lost a lot of these pedagogical areas. And so I think it's gotten harder for students, but it's an interesting process. I really like it. I love that aspect of it. I think it tests something quite special, but it's a challenging one.
And so if you have a U.S. student or even your national student who wants to try their hand at Oxbridge, what do you tell them? How do you prepare them for that?
The key is to just let them know this is going to be, both of these processes are difficult and onerous, and they unfortunately conflict at the same time. So you need to prepare yourself as much as possible and ahead of time as much as possible. And there are many things you can do in the U.S. process, obviously, in advance. The personal statement is going to be the personal statement. It's always going to be the personal statement. It doesn't have to be written in October. Could be written before October, everybody.
Okay, this is breaking news. I want everybody to pay close attention to this.
Could be written earlier. And the other components of the application, I think people often underestimate how hard it is to fill out the Common App. And just like the time it takes. It's just time, right? And people have limited time. So any of that can be done earlier needs to be done earlier so that you can focus on the other components of the application.
And you've talked about this a couple times, right? Personal statements and what makes a good personal statement? The eternal question.
So many different axes. I think for me, it starts with authenticity. Admissions officers read thousands of these. They can really tell which ones were crafted by a human high school student and which ones were crafted by a not human high school student,
mom and dad,
exactly, or any crafted by is an interesting way. I think that word is important because they don't expect it to be some extemporaneously brilliantly written essay, and it shouldn't be. It just should be crafted by a high school student, right? So what is the authentic voice of that student? That's kind of first. And again, telling someone that takes a lot of time to develop. You're going to have to rewrite this thing so many times in order for your voice to come out. but every time you rewrite a sentence, it's going to come out more in your voice. And don't try to put fancy words that you think people want to hear.
Thank you.
Use your own voice, man. Like,
well, Tony,
like that. Exactly. Like, you don't talk like that. And then the other components of it are, I think, a little more strategic, looking at the application as a whole and seeing, what parts of you aren't we getting out? If I look at this, I look at your activities, I look at your grades, I look at your extracurricular activities, like, what am I not getting about you? What still is missing, or how do we tie these things together? Those are a few of the more important elements for me.
And I think how do you put your experience into context is always, for me, the most important thing. And just telling your story in a way that shows, the challenges that you've had to overcome. And it doesn't always have to be a mountain. And of course, the trauma essay that everybody feels like, we have to have a trauma essay. I don't know your opinions on how you approach these things.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's the learning and growth. Like, how do you show that you've been in a position where you've grown, you've learned, you've learned a lesson that was really valuable and important for you, and it took you from one place to a next through that maturation process. I mean, what do schools want to see? I think that's the other thing that people don't recognize, which is that, like, you're trying to trust that this high school student who has never been outside of their home can come to a new location and be surrounded by kids their own age and still study and thrive and do well. What makes you, what gives me the confidence that you can do that you have the maturity to do that?
Exactly.
That's a big part of it as well.
Well, and I think too, I talk a lot about crafting a class, being on the other side of the desk and having to put together a unique class that's going to be greater than the sum of its parts. And it's frustrating sometimes. I'd be interested to hear how you explain this to students. Sometimes you don't get in, not because you're not good enough, but because for whatever reason, it just didn't work with the class they were trying to craft. But that's a very hard message when you worked that hard for so many years.
I think I think this process is really hard. I usually try to rely on statistics to some degree, where you throw out numbers like 4.8%, and a student that's mathematically inclined, that you just then say, okay, so if you've got 100 bites at this apple, 4.8 times it's going to come up. Like, yes, you're awesome. Maybe you raise that a little bit, but you don't raise it to 100 or 50 or 40 or even 30. So, like, let's embrace that's just the way it is. And if you put together a really thoughtful application that is really you're going to get in somewhere really well. You're going to get into a great school, and you're going to thrive at that great school. So, like, let's put this all into the wider context of the menu. And that's what we talked about before. There's so many amazing schools, right? Like, you're going to find one, and it's going to find you, and that marriage is going to be great.
I actually was just able to talk to a student about who I think is a great fit for one of my very favorite schools, Deep Springs.
Okay, yeah.
Which is a wild, off the charts, crazy experience. Not for everybody by any stretch of the imagination, but it's so great when you find a student where you're like, you are going to love this. So it remains to be seen how, if they decide to go that path and if they're successful. So,
very cool.
So I guess one last question. I'm very, very grateful for your time. You've been in this industry now for 22 years. What is one thing you wish you could change?
About the industry
as a whole, either tutoring or admissions. If you had a magic wand and you could just make a change, what would it be?
I wish there were more. I think it's great that there's competition. I always wish that people were more honest. I think one of the problems is you get one chance with a kid, and once they've taken their SAT and once they've applied to college, that chance is over, right? And if you do them the disservice of being dishonest to them, which I think occasionally happens, that's someone's life that you've now messed up, and that's really upsetting to me. And then on the flip side of things, I think tests are great. I think these tests are not bad tests. I think they do a good job of testing a lot of really important skills. They've been demonized and marginalized for reasons that I don't agree with for the most part.
Fair enough. Who is being dishonest and doing a disservice to those children?
I think some people in the test prep industry, some people in the admissions industry. I think test prep, in many ways more so, admissions, you have to live with the result of your admissions edition, or no, test prep, you very rarely do. I mean, the kids takes the test, they almost always go up a little bit, right? They've improved, everyone's had. And I think that's where a lot of dishonesty comes in.
It's interesting to hear you, I know I said last question, but it's interesting to hear you say that you think the tests are a good thing, because there is a lot of negative pressure on testing, but yet we're seeing the top schools bring testing back. Why do you think that it's something that the schools are coming back and leaning in on again?
Grade inflation has been rampant. I think it's very difficult to tell a straight A student from one school from a straight A student from another school just by looking at their grades, because they're all almost perfect at this point for a lot of students. So what does that tell you? And a test adds an additional metric. It's a data point. It should never be the be-all, end-all of an admissions process by any stretch of the imagination. But as a data point, is it a valuable data point? Of course it is. It's an independent, standardized measure that everyone has to take the same one of, and that they study for and prepare for. That's an important data point.
No, it is. It is. And it's hard, I think, for families to understand that externally, and I get it. Like, does it matter? Well, for this student, maybe it matters more. For this student, maybe it doesn't matter at all. And some students, it can actually save them from an academic wobble that they might have had. So yes.
And I love test optional policies. I think that they're great. There's lots of students who in my early career really struggled with standardized testing. And we always were like, oh man, I wish you didn't have to take this test. Like, this is such a struggle for you. You have certain learning differences that just make this really a challenge and not a fair one. And so for those students, you shouldn't have to submit an SAT score. But for other students, really good test takers, great data point. Why not?
And do you feel there's been a lot of, you brought up something about learning differences. Do you recommend that students, A, apply for accommodation on the standardized testing, and B, disclose that in their applications?
Certainly, if a student has a learning difference that warrants an extra time accommodation and has at school, there are many times throughout my career where, these things are not always easy to see. And in a large school, teachers might not have caught it, administrators might not have caught it, parents certainly don't have the skills to catch it. But I've been working with certain students, and you have them read out loud to you, or they're doing a math problem, and you're like, that's interesting.
Exactly.
Can we do that again? Because
exactly.
And then very sensitively, and if you have a very close relationship with a family, you can mention something, and that discovery can be really impactful and powerful. So yeah, in those instances, that they absolutely should apply for extra time accommodations on a standardized test. They would need it. Right. Has there been an abuse of that system? Certainly there has. Yes. But all systems get abused. It doesn't mean they're bad systems at their core. There's just, we should try to tighten them up in some respects. So yeah, I hope that answers it.
No, that was a perfect answer, Matt. Thank you very much. We're running up on time today. Want to thank everybody for following along. Please stop by our social media at AdmittedlyCo on Instagram, TikTok. We welcome your questions. If you're interested in working with Matt and part of the exceptional team here at Advantage Testing, you can go to www.admittedly.co/programs and get the full rundown and access to our special relationship with this incredible group of professionals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you for joining us today. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Admittedly podcast and download this episode. I welcome you to share your thoughts and questions with me. You can find us on social media at Admittedly Podcast. I look forward to continuing our journey together.